All right, so today we are going deep, deep, deep on self-improvement. But not the stuff you hear all the time. We're talking about the hidden barriers that trip us up, even when we are like really trying, to be better.
Yeah, it's amazing how much we blame ourselves, our willpower or our motivation. But the real problem might be something we don't even see. The sources that we are looking at today really dig deep into the psychology and the habits, and even things outside of ourselves that can totally derail us, even when we have the best
Well,
intentions.
is this like a self-improvement conspiracy? We're like detectives here. So first up on our list of suspects, unrealistic expectations. I've definitely been guilty of this. I don't know about you. Setting the bar so high, I practically need a jetpack. And our sources really dig into why that just sets us up to fail.
Exactly. And what we need to remember is our brains, they're not really wired for these huge leaps. What our brains love is progress. So it's all about breaking things down. You love a clear structure. So instead of thinking of just this giant goal, think about creating stepping stones. And each one that you reach is a victory, like a mini victory. And celebrating those actually rewires your brain to want more progress. Isn't that cool?
That makes so much sense. Like, remember that time I tried to become a morning person?
Yeah.
Like overnight, it was a total disaster. But when I started just waking up 15 minutes earlier each week, now I actually see the sunrise pretty regularly. Yeah. Small wins, big impact.
I love that, yeah. And it's not just the size of the goal. It's also got to be something that fits with what you can actually do. The source material really talks about understanding your limits, like how much time you actually have, your energy levels, that kind of stuff. So you're not burning yourself out before you even begin.
Yeah, it's like trying to run a marathon with zero training. You're just asking for an injury. Speaking of things that we can injure ourselves with, fear of failure, I mean, we all experience it, but the sources we're looking at suggest that. Maybe it holds us back more than we realize.
And the really interesting thing is how it shows up. Like, we might procrastinate, we might sabotage ourselves, or sometimes we actually cling to things that aren't working. Because of this thing called the sunk cost fallacy.
The sunk cost fallacy. Yeah. Is that like when you're watching a movie?
Yeah.
And it's terrible,
Mm-hmm.
but you've already been watching for an hour. So you're like, well, might as well finish it.
Exactly. And it happens with self-improvement too. Like we stick with a goal or even a habit that's clearly not working because we've already put so much into it. But what the source is saying is sometimes the bravest thing we can do for our own growth is to know when to quit and then put our energy into something better.
Oh, so it's not always about pushing through every single obstacle. It's about knowing which battles to pick. Like sometimes the self-improvement move is to stop doing something, not starting something new.
Right, that's such a good point. And that actually leads to another thing that people don't always think about, our environment. The people around us, the places we spend our time, the messages that we are taking in, our sources are saying these external factors can totally sabotage us, like without us even realizing it.
Okay, yeah, this is where it gets deep.
Yeah.
It's like, imagine you're trying to eat healthy, but everyone in your family only cooks fried food. Good luck with that.
Exactly, and it goes way beyond food. Think about the people you're always around. Are they supportive of your growth? Do they have similar values? Or do they, even if they don't mean to, kind of undermine what you're trying to do?
It's like trying to swim upstream.
Yeah.
When everyone else is just floating downstream. You might get there eventually, but man, it's going to be hard. So the source material is really making us think about our environment. Is it helping or is it making things harder?
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to get different perspectives. Talk to people outside your normal circle, find a mentor, even just watch how other people interact. It can give you such a fresh perspective on how your environment is shaping your choices, maybe without you even knowing.
Okay, so we're not just talking about willpower here. We're talking about recognizing these invisible forces and being smart about how we deal with them. This is juicy stuff.
It is. And speaking of things that are tempting but maybe a little dangerous, the source material spends a good chunk of time talking about instant gratification, especially in our modern world with all the technology and everything.
Yeah, I mean, social media, instant news, we can get anything we want instantly. Like the message everywhere is get what you want right now. No waiting allowed.
Exactly. And that is why the source contrasts this with the idea of delayed gratification, which is, according to them, a key ingredient for real self-improvement. It's like you're not just looking for a quick fix. Think of it this way. You're building a cathedral, not a garden shed. And that takes time, patience, and being okay with waiting for a bigger payoff down the line.
Okay, I'm getting chills.
Yeah.
That metaphor just like blew my mind.
Yeah.
We're so used to instant everything, we forget that some things are worth waiting for, and our source is saying. That self-improvement is one of those things. It's not about some overnight transformation. It's about the slow, steady work of building a better version of ourselves.
I love that, brick by brick.
Yes, brick by brick.
And that brings us to another piece of this puzzle that often gets ignored when we're chasing quick fixes, our inner critic. You know, that voice inside that loves to point out our flaws, make our mistakes seem huge, and just make us feel bad in general.
Oh, don't even get me started on my inner critic. That thing could win awards for negativity.
But here's the thing, we all have one, and it's not going anywhere. The trick, according to the source, is to learn to manage it. So instead of letting it run the show, we can challenge what it's saying, reframe that negativity, and build a more compassionate and supportive inner voice.
Okay, so we can't just silence it completely, but we can maybe turn down the volume and maybe hire a fact checker. I like that. And the source actually gives us a really cool technique for doing this. It's called reframing.
Reframing those negative thoughts, yeah.
Reframing negative thoughts.
And it's easier than you think. Instead of saying, I'm so terrible at this, I'm still learning and I'm making progress. It's a small change, but it can make a big difference. And how you think and feel and how motivated you are, it's all about trading that self-criticism for self-compassion, remembering you're on a journey. And it's okay to mess up along the way.
Oh, I love that. Changing I'm terrible to I'm learning. I am totally going to try that. And speaking of things that sound good but maybe aren't so helpful, the source material calls out this whole guru culture and how it takes advantage of that desire we all have for fast results. It's so tempting to believe there's a secret formula or a shortcut, but
real self-improvement is about what we've been talking about. Setting realistic goals, being kind to ourselves, and putting in the work. Understanding that change takes time and there are no magic solutions.
So it's about building good habits, not chasing the latest trend. It's about knowing ourselves and our challenges, not trying to fit into someone else's idea of what we should be. It's about embracing the journey, even when it's messy, even when it's not perfect. Because it's all about becoming the best version of ourselves, and that's what I'm taking away from this first part.
That's a great summary, yeah.
Of our deep dive.
We've covered so much, all these hidden things, that can make self-improvement feel impossible. But the good news is, now we know about them, so we can start to deal with them.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, right? And understanding the psychology behind why we struggle is a huge step towards actually overcoming those struggles. We'll be back in the next part of our deep dive with even more fascinating stuff from our sources. But for now, we want to leave you with a question.
Okay, what's one small step that you can take today to face one of these hidden barriers in your own life? Maybe it's setting a more realistic goal, or reframing a negative thought, or just acknowledging how much your environment is affecting you. Remember, every little step counts.
And we'll be here to help you along the way. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep working towards being the best version of you.
Awesome, I like that.
Okay.
Welcome back to our deep dive on all those hidden things that make self-improvement so tough.
I've been thinking about that question you asked at the end of the last part, about that one small step we can take to deal with these hidden barriers. And it's making me realize that even just being aware of them is a step in the right direction.
Oh, absolutely. Awareness is huge. It's like turning the lights on in a dark room, right? Suddenly you can see what you're dealing with. Speaking of things that trip us up, the source material talks about self-sabotage.
Okay, self-sabotage. That sounds kind of dramatic, like something a villain would do in a movie.
Well, yeah, kind of, but it's usually not something we're doing on purpose. It can be really subtle, like procrastinating, making excuses, or even creating chaos in our lives to avoid growing. It's like we have this resistance to change even when we want to be better.
Wait, so it's like I'm fighting against myself?
Yeah.
That's kind of freaky, but I get it. I totally procrastinate on things that I know would be good for me. The source material says this might be because we're scared of success. Or maybe we feel like we don't deserve it.
That's a really interesting point. And yeah, the source does talk about self-worth. If deep down we don't think we're good enough for success or happiness, we might actually sabotage ourselves to avoid disappointment. Or even the pressure of becoming this new, better person.
Whoa, that's heavy. We're so afraid of failing that we end up failing on purpose just to avoid the possibility of succeeding.
Yeah, it's complicated. And it shows why it's so important to deal with those beliefs and work on building our self-worth. Because real self-improvement isn't just about changing habits, it's about changing how we see ourselves.
Okay, so it's not just about adding new stuff. It's like upgrading my whole operating system. But even with a new and improved self-image, we still have to deal with those old habits, the ones that never seem to go away no matter how hard we try.
Right, and the source actually gets into the science of habits. Our brains are all about being efficient. Habits, even the bad ones, are like shortcuts that save energy. So when we try to change them, we're basically rewiring our brains, and that takes time and effort.
So it's not about being mad at myself when I slip up. It's about understanding that it's part of the process.
Exactly, and that's why the source talks about having a system to support those new habits. Like imagine you're building something, you need scaffolding to hold it up until it's strong enough to stand on its own. Same thing with habits.
Okay, I'm loving these building metaphors. So what kind of scaffolding are we talking about?
Well, one thing the source suggests is accountability. Having someone to check in with, a friend, a mentor, even an online group. It can give you that extra support to stay on track, especially when you're not feeling motivated.
Oh, it's like having a workout buddy. You're
Yeah.
more likely to actually go to the gym if you know someone's waiting for you.
Hmm.
And it's not just about showing up, it's about celebrating those small wins and having someone to cheer you on when you're struggling.
Exactly. And the source also talks about tracking your progress, not in a way that's obsessive, but just to see what's working. Identify patterns and make changes if you need to. It's like treating self-improvement as an experiment.
I love that. So instead of blindly following some rules, I'm a scientist, experimenting on myself, gathering data, checking the results, and figuring out what works best for me.
Yes, exactly. And that leads to another important point. Being flexible. Life is unpredictable, and your self-improvement journey will be too. There will be detours, setbacks, things you don't expect. The key is to adapt, learn from your mistakes, and keep going.
Oh, it's like that saying, the only way to fail is to quit. So even if I stumble, I just got to get back up and keep moving.
Mm.
And one thing that can really trip us up, according to the source, is this idea of quick fixes.
Hmm.
Like our world is obsessed with instant results, and it's easy to fall into that trap,
Yeah.
even when it comes to self-improvement.
It is, and as we talked about before, the source really pushes back against that quick fix mindset. Real change takes time. It's about new habits, a new mindset, building a solid foundation. Those overnight transformations you see everywhere, they're often fake and they don't last. They might get you excited for a minute, but they don't deal with the real issues.
So it's about the long game, not
Yeah.
the quick win. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly, and it's a marathon you can run at your own pace. In your own way, no comparing yourself to others, no pressure to be perfect. The source really emphasizes enjoying the journey, with all its ups and downs, and celebrating every bit of progress you make.
That's actually really encouraging. It's not about reaching some finish line. It's about enjoying the process of becoming a better me. And on that note, maybe it's time to move on to the last part of our deep dive.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. We've covered a lot of ground, all these barriers and misconceptions that can make self-improvement feel impossible. In the last part, we can look at some practical advice from the source that can help us deal with these challenges and create a more sustainable and fulfilling path for growth.
Sounds good. We'll be right back to wrap things up and leave you with some actionable advice to take with you on your own journey. And we are back for the final part of our deep dive into these sneaky little barriers to self-improvement. We've talked about self-sabotage, those quick fix myths, so much good stuff.
It has been fascinating, hasn't it? And as we wrap up, I think one of the biggest takeaways for me from all this source material is how important patience and resilience are for real lasting change.
Yeah, it's funny. We talk so much about goals and taking action, but we don't really talk about the mindset we need to actually stick with it. It's like we're so focused on the destination, we forget about the journey.
Exactly. And our sources are really pushing us to rethink how we see self-improvement. It's not about being perfect. It's about embracing the messiness, the imperfections, because that's where the growth happens. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to have setbacks. But the key is to see those as opportunities to learn, not as failures.
It's like learning to ride a bike.
Yeah.
Right. You're going to fall a few times, scrape your knees, but you get back up, you figure out what you did wrong, and eventually you're riding. And the more you do it, the better you get.
Perfect analogy. And the sources also talk about how important it is to get support. We're not meant to do this alone. Having people who understand our goals, who can encourage us, give us advice, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it's like having your own personal cheer squad, reminding you that you're not in this alone. Whether it's a mentor, a therapist, a good friend, even an online community, having that support system can really keep you going.
Absolutely. And the source also reminds us to celebrate those little victories. It's easy to get caught up in the big picture, but acknowledging those small wins can really help us stay positive and keep moving forward.
It's like those mile markers you see during a marathon.
Yeah.
They're not the finish line, but they keep you going. And speaking of keeping things moving, the source also talks about tracking our progress, making adjustments as we go, It's not about being rigid. It's about being flexible, listening to ourselves.
Think of it like a feedback loop, right? You set a goal, you take action, you see what happens, and then you adjust based on what you learned. It's a constant process of refining and improving.
Oh, so we're like scientists doing experiments on ourselves,
Exactly.
gathering data, testing things out, tweaking our methods until we get the results we want. And that brings us to something really important that the source emphasizes: self-compassion.
Yes, absolutely. Real self-improvement isn't about being perfect. It's about making changes that stick. It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress. And there's no one right way to do this. The most important thing is to be kind to ourselves along the way. Celebrate the good stuff, learn from the not so good stuff, and just keep trying to be the best version of ourselves, whatever that means for each of us.
I love that. And as always, we want to leave you with something to think about as you continue on your own self-improvement journey.
Okay, so now that you know about these hidden barriers, what's one way you can be kind to yourself today?
Maybe it's quieting that inner critic. Maybe it's recognizing how far you've come. Or maybe it's just giving yourself permission to rest and recharge. Remember, every step, no matter how small, is a step in the right direction.
So true.
And with that, we'll leave you to your own reflections.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, keep growing.
Happy self-improving.